back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to talk about an article, a short article I read today in The Guardian, published November of this year, 2022, entitled Neurodiverse Women Sought for Jobs at GCHQ and BAE Systems. Now that title is first of all quite telling, in that it seems to me now that the word neurodiverse is being applied as a kind of blanket phrase, a blanket description to cover people with a whole array of different diagnoses. It's like they don't separate people into different categories. They're collapsing a lot of categories into one neurodiverse description. Personally, this I find very troubling because obviously, you know, there's a massive difference between someone with dyslexia, for example, and someone with autism, but they treat them all as one neurodiverse description now. So it says, so it talks about people with autism, dyslexia and ADHD. They're trying to get more and more people with those conditions to work in cybersecurity roles. It says 22% of people who have autism are in work. That's from the Office for National Statistics. So only 22% of people with autism are in work. And that's meant to be the lowest among the disabilities they analysed. That's quite telling as well. So that really goes to show, you know, that autistics who are in work are very much the minority, and yet at one of the groups I attend, pretty much every single autistic person there is in work, which is quite interesting. And yet, obviously, that isn't representative of most autistic people. Most autistic people are like me, out of work. You'd expect maybe that if you go to a group, the majority of people would be like me, but that's not actually the case a lot of the time. But I suspect that that's because of the way maybe more able people, as a rule, tend to access groups. Although it's not always the case, because at a group I used to attend way back in, I think it's about 2008. I think it was just around the time I got diagnosed. It was a very different picture. Most of the people at that group were out of work, and the few that were in work were in kind of low-paid sort of type jobs. And most of the people, well, all of them were, I guess, obviously disabled, and they were all men, interestingly as well. I was the only woman there. But this is a bit in the article, by the way, that I found really grating. So it talks about this. So first of all, it collapses all of these groups into one neurodiverse definition, and then it talks about supposed fast pattern recognition, sharper accuracy, and greater attention for detail that is supposedly shown by people with a neurodiverse profile. So this is very kind of sweeping. So it's collapsing all of these conditions into one, and then it's talking about, and then it's positive stereotyping. The positive stereotyping that is so damaging to the self-esteem of people like me. It actually makes me take a deep breath. Angry, because it is discriminatory against people like me, actually, and yeah, it's positive stereotyping. It's not very nice when you have been diagnosed with a condition to read about all these supposed strengths you're supposed to have, when you don't necessarily have them. But yeah, aside from that, collapsing all of these conditions into one neurodiverse profile is just so trivialising and sweeping, because autism and dyslexia are just completely separate conditions. If you ask me, dyslexic people are essentially neurotypical with a slight difference in information processing. Autism is, obviously dyslexia can be a really serious disability, don't make no mistake, particularly if someone can't, and obviously there are degrees of dyslexia, and at the very severe end of dyslexia, someone might not even be able to read, and that's like a very severe disability. really can be quite crippling, and that can mean they can't work and all sorts of things, and could be like a real, severe disability. But right the way through to someone at the milder end of that dyslexia spectrum who might still have struggles with reading and writing and things like that, but can still, but not to the extent, of what's the word? You can get by basically. Obviously, it's still a disability for them, but they can get by. But dyslexia, no matter how severely it affects someone, I would say is still very, very different to autism. It's a completely different thing. Autism is a pervasive developmental disability. Dyslexia is a specific developmental disability, affecting one area of information processing, whereas autism is just a lot more pervasive, and they're just miles apart. ADHD is, I guess, is closer to autism in the extent that it's more, unlike dyslexia, ADHD is a bit more pervasive. But there is a very high number of autistic people who either have ADHD or at least have strong traits. I know I definitely have quite a number of traits of that, which is hardly surprising because most autistic people do. That's part of the reason why they didn't actually diagnose ADHD in autistic people until about I think it's 2013, because before then autism was like, before that point, if you would before that point, if you were autistic, they wouldn't diagnose those other conditions. Obviously, some autistic people had already accumulated previous diagnoses of ADHD, dyspraxia, etc., and they still have those diagnoses. But for anyone who was going for an assessment for the first time, if they were diagnosed autistic, that was like a diagnosis of exclusion. They then wouldn't get diagnosed with any other condition. In a sort of weird way, I actually think it was better back then, because now I see a lot of people diagnosis shopping, and there's a lot of but usually among like a really, really able autistics who end up accumulating a really long train of diagnoses. But at the same time, there are autistics out there who do, and I know someone at a group I attend who has very, very severe ADHD and is also clearly autistic. So I don't know. There are pros and cons to diagnosing both, but obviously it does help some people a lot. But what I'm trying to say is, so I'm probably talking a bit all over the place today. Bear with. Collecting my thoughts here. So I'm taking any note. Sorry, my brain's all going over the place. Just excuse me. Sometimes my brain just doesn't play ball when I'm trying to get my thoughts in order. But what I'm trying to say is that while ADHD is, I guess, shares more in common with autism than maybe dyslexia, or at least more severe ADHD does, they're still very, very different conditions, because obviously autism affects like social processing as well, whereas ADHD is more executive functioning. Although it obviously can affect social skills as well, indirectly, but they are still different conditions. So I just don't like this way in which all these conditions that are very different to one another are being collapsed into one. I just really don't like that at all. Into one neurodiverse sort of thing. But that seems to be increasingly what's happening these days. I don't like the direction of travel, because it makes me think that maybe eventually they will. If the neurodiversity movement has its say, potentially all the separate conditions will get collapsed into one kind of description, neurodiverse. I hope that doesn't happen, but sometimes I do wonder if that's what's going to happen, and I don't like that at all. But when it says fast pattern recognition, sharper accuracy, and greater attention to detail, that is such a sweeping stereotype. I mean, that's a sweeping stereotype for people with autism, but they've collapsed all these conditions into one, so it's an even more sweeping stereotype, because they've collapsed all these conditions into one, and they're saying that all these conditions share these features, when all these conditions, for starters, are very different to one another anyway. And then, to quote Jo Caven, GCHQ's Director of Strategy, Policy and Engagement, she said, Neurodiversity is key to keeping Britain safe. What the fuck? Key to keeping Britain safe. Excuse me, can you say that again? Am I hearing things correctly? Key to keeping Britain safe? Well, I mean, I'm gobsmacked. It's absolutely fucking ridiculous. I mean, it seriously is. Sorry, I shouldn't swear. It just makes me feel very angry. That's why I'm doing this video, because I just want to share it with you, because I'm sure some of you will also be like, what the hell? I mean, you know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? It's absolutely absurd. Put it like this way, if everyone was like me, not being able to work, well, I suppose in theory you could argue that maybe we would be safer if everyone was like me, because there probably would be less likely to go to war, because, you know, I can hardly see people like me going to war in a hurry, but, so maybe there would be less war if everyone was like me, but if everyone was like me, there wouldn't be food on the table, so you definitely wouldn't be safer there, because, I mean, you know, if you've got someone with very severe OCD plus autism, you know, getting food on people's table isn't going to happen. If everyone was like me, wheels wouldn't turn. So, yeah, because she's obviously not talking about people like me, is she? It's also interesting, it's a very capitalist recruitment drive as well, bearing in mind that this is part of a war machine, and the war machine definitely does not keep disabled people, well, it doesn't keep anyone safe, but disabled people are actually the ones who are most at risk from war. Like, for example, in the Ukraine crisis, those most at risk are obviously disabled people. You know, anyone on the margins is going to lose out the most in a wartime situation, that's a fact. And it's interesting, like, this is a very capitalist argument here, so they're trying to get neurodiverse people to essentially oil the wheels of the war machine, while those who are like properly disabled are the ones who are most going to lose out, so, because if we went to war. So basically this is hardly keeping them safe, is it? You see what I mean? So that phrase was just absolutely laughable. Neurodiversity is key to keeping people safe. My arse. At GCHQ, some of the most talented and creative people have a neurodiverse profile, including dyslexia, autism, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia. It's interesting that they include dyscalculia in that list, because dyscalculia is often an outlier that's never included. But that's interesting. Surely if you have dyscalculia, at least severe dyscalculia, by definition you're going to have a problem with fast pattern recognition, because dyscalculia affects pattern recognition. I certainly wouldn't be able to work in that environment. Even if I didn't have OCD, that is not a job I'll be able to do, because I have severe dyscalculia, which means I really, really struggle with that type of fast pattern recognition that apparently people like me are supposed to excel at. Well, I was not included in that memo. And sharper accuracy. Well, I tend to make a lot of mistakes, because in those type of environments I get very distracted. Yeah, again, didn't quite get the memo there. Greater attention to detail. Yes, I do pay a lot of attention to detail. Unfortunately, it's very overwhelming, and unfortunately, it often means that I get distracted, and my executive functioning is crap. So, no, I wouldn't be able to do that role and keep Britain safe. But then again, they're clearly not including people like me in this discussion. So, yeah, enough said about that one. But thank you for watching.